an Arizonan Triassic riverbank 203 million years ago. Early morning fog is rolling down from the surrounding mountains, which makes visibility hard for any creature wanting to take a drink from the river. We're reaching the end of the Triassic period, and life is at its most diverse to date. Early dinosaurs have begun to populate the landscape, creatures that will one day rule the earth. Pterosaurs are beginning to evolve. Ichthyosaurs are the largest creatures on planet Earth. And many different types of reptile and proto-mammal are making the marshlands and forests home. This particular stretch of riverbank is thick with horsetail plants, which will provide fine grazing for some of the region's larger herbivores. The plants obscure the view of the river, standing like tall reeds in the early morning haze. Behind the horsetails lies a forest, where the peculiar chirping of insects and amphibians can be heard at a deafening volume. Rustling from the horsetails betrays the presence of a creature heading down to the water to drink. A dinosaur. The dinosaur in question, Coelophysis, is an early theropod dinosaur, a pioneering member of a group that will one day give rise to some of the biggest carnivores ever to live. He's a lot more humble in size, however, standing about a meter tall. A thin down of filamentous proto-feathers covers his body, used not only for display, but also to keep him warm, and his long tail intertwines with the horsetails, brushing them from left to right as he lowers his head to drink. In his haste to quench his thirst, he's foolishly forgotten to scan his surroundings for danger. Larger predators do lurk here, but this is a stretch of river he's visited time and time again, and he's always safe amongst the foliage. Rearing his head, he turns to head back into the foliage, before an almighty crashing sound from the river marks his end. Like a bullet from the blue, a colossal reptile, 12 meters in length, has launched itself from the water. Its meter-and-a-half long jaws agape, presenting row upon row of knife-like teeth. Before it even knows what's happening, the little dinosaur is impaled, thrown to the left by the creature's powerful neck muscles, and dragged back under the water to an untimely grave. The assailant, Smilosukis, will feed well today. This huge reptile is an Archosaur, a group containing the dinosaurs as well as the crocodiles. But he is neither. As the largest terrestrial creature of the late Triassic period, he is a truly colossal ambush predator, relying on surprise and stealth to catch his prey. Coelophysis might be a theropod dinosaur, but this land is by no means his. Archosaurs are a widespread group of diapsid vertebrates, which have existed on this earth for 248 million years, continue to exist whilst you watch this video, and will continue to exist long after you and I are gone. They evolved in the early Triassic, and are the group of animals that would eventually give rise to the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, all of them, are themselves Archosaurs, and lived alongside other groups of Archosaurs throughout their entire existence. There are only two modern representative groups of Archosaurs, crocodilians and birds, which are, in turn, the closest living relatives to dinosaurs. The Archosaurs are in turn split up into two groups: the pseudosuchians, or creatures closely related to crocodilians, and avimetatarsalians, or creatures closely related to dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Archosaurs were once much more varied and complex, however, and they reached their peak throughout the late Triassic period, where one might argue that they were the dominant group of reptiles alive on Earth at that time. When we think of the Triassic, we picture the first dinosaurs. But they didn't appear on the scene until the end of the period. And even when they did, they started off small, living in the shadows of much mightier creatures, the non-dinosaurian Archosaurs. At their peak, these dinosaurs took on many forms and filled many evolutionary niches. Huge apex predators stalked the land and waterways, while large, bulky herbivores fed on low-growing vegetation, wary of them. Diminutive, slender Archosaurs sprinted through the undergrowth, catching insects and small reptiles. Even the pterosaurs, the iconic flying reptiles of the Mesozoic, were Archosaurs. But we won't be covering them in this video, since we have recently published a separate documentary on them, which goes into much greater detail. In this video, we will be focusing on the non-dinosaurian Archosaurs that ruled the Earth during the Triassic period. We will be going back over 200 million years to a time ruled by reptiles, but not the ones you might expect. We will stop in North America, where we will meet sail-backed predators. South America, which saw the largest diversity of Archosaurs in the Triassic. Africa, home to some of the most iconic non-dinosaurian Archosaurs of all time. Europe, where the most bizarre Archosaurs of all lived. And finally Asia, where we will cross paths with some stranger-than-fiction aquatic Archosaurs. Welcome to a deep dive of some of the planet's unsung rulers, as we explore the non-dinosaurian Archosaurs of the Triassic period. North America has probably the highest density of non-dinosaur Archosaurs that we are aware of to this date. If a time traveler were to head back to the Triassic of the United States or Canada, they would be rewarded with some impressive sights indeed. Large armored herbivores lifting plants out of the marshy rivers, with giant crocodile-like creatures laying in wait downstream. On the banks, bizarre predators stalk their quarries through the arid deserts and boggy floodplains. Uncannily dinosaur-like in their appearance, but not by their nature. Beginning with the aforementioned herbivorous Archosaurs, North America played host to a variety of strange armored giants throughout the Triassic. These were the Adasaurs, quadrupedal Archosaurian reptiles, some of which were the size of small cars. Pick up a book on prehistoric life, and you'd be likely to find a picture of Desmatosuchus, one such Adasaur native to Texas throughout the late Triassic period. Reaching roughly 4.5 meters in length, Desmatosuchus looked a bit like a crocodile on stilts, only much bulkier, and sporting 2 defensive shoulder spikes the size of a human arm. This was a gentle giant, and would have only used these features at times of dire need, likely to ward off the large predators of the region, intent on making Desmatosuchus a hearty meal. At the front end of the reptile was a strange shovel-like snout, almost like that of a hadrosaur. This was clearly a herbivorous creature that would have used its modified snout to dig up soft vegetation from the riverside soil to feed on. Many Desmatosuchus specimens have been discovered in groups, indicating that this was an animal that preferred safety in numbers as part of large herds. These herds would have roamed the plains of the Triassic alongside the earliest known dinosaurs, tilling the soil and consuming huge amounts of vegetation. Also unearthed in Texas is the late Triassic Adasaur Longosuchus, closely related to Desmatosuchus. This specimen was 3 meters long, but lacked the distinctive shoulder spikes that clearly identified the latter. Considerably less is known about this creature than its famous cousin, but it is thought that it would have been a browser of low-growing vegetation, also lacking the shovel-like snout of Desmatosuchus. These creatures would, however, have occupied the same time and space, so it is paramount that, as among the largest and most numerous herbivores of the area, they were adapted to different feeding styles to avoid direct competition. Armed with many rows of square-shaped plates lining its back and sides, Longosuchus would have lived much like a nodosaur dinosaur, relying heavily on its heavy biological defenses to ward off prey. It was likely a slow animal and a poor runner, evident from its short legs. But given enough time, the creature would have been able to protect itself from an unruly assailant. The presence of such bulky and well-armored herbivores begs an interesting question. Why did these creatures need to be so defensive? The answer, as always, lies in the fossils. Several large carnivorous archosaurs have been unearthed from the Triassic rocks of North America over the years. For a very long time, and throughout the Triassic period, some of these creatures would have been the top of the food chain, larger and more dangerous than even the most well-adapted dinosaurs that were beginning to evolve. A relatively recent example can be found in the 3-meter-long crocodilomorph archosaur, Carnifex, which was as dangerous as the name makes it sound. Discovered in 2015 in the Pecan Formation of North Carolina, it was lovingly given the species name Carnifex carolinensis, which translates into English as Carolina butcher. Carolina at the time, 231 million years ago, was an expansive deep river basin inhabited by various other species of reptile. Carnifex was the largest predator of the region, resembling a theropod dinosaur in crocodile's clothing. Adopting a bipedal stance, this creature had powerful legs and would likely have been capable of short bursts of speed, with a long tapering tail that aided it in balance. Its snout was long and filled with rows of sharp teeth, perfectly adapted to tearing at flesh. Rearing up on its hind legs, it would have been a tall animal, surely presenting a terrifying sight among the Triassic floodplains of Carolina. Elsewhere in North America, even stranger creatures were evolving. Arizonosaurus, native to, as its name would suggest, Arizona, was a large pseudosuchian archosaur, measuring around 3 meters long, similar to Carnifex. It was a quadrupedal animal with long, deep jaws, relatively short legs, and a long tail. Most bizarre was the sail running down the archosaur's back, a series of neural spines that gave the animal a superficial resemblance to dinosaurs such as Spinosaurus. The exact function of these spines is not known, but potentially, Arizonosaurus may have used the sail to regulate its body temperature, or to display colorful patterns to rivals. Arizonosaurus is known to have inhabited semi-arid scrubland when it was alive, perhaps prowling the dry lands of North America in search of small reptiles or amphibians. A close relative of Arizonosaurus, also found in North America in the Triassic, is perhaps the most famous non-dinosaurian archosaur to be discovered. Postosuchus, the archosaur in question, arguably has the BBC's seminal 1999 documentary, Walking with Dinosaurs, to thank for that fame. In the very first episode, the creature was pretty much the main focal point. The documentary was very much ahead of its time, and is very enjoyable even to this day. But there were a few inaccuracies in the way Postosuchus was presented. Depicted as a quadrupedal animal in the show, it has now been proven the archosaur was actually bipedal, Horsetails was also a little smaller than how it was first shown, measuring between 4 to 5 meters in length, instead of the proposed 6. Still, it would have been a formidable predator, with long, deep jaws and powerful biting muscles. We're still yet to cover the most amazing non-dinosaur archosaur predators of the Triassic, however, the phytosaurs. Closely resembling crocodiles and alligators, these animals are great examples of convergent evolution, an evolutionary process when two unrelated groups of animals evolve the same adaptations to meet their lifestyles and needs. Although these creatures were distantly related to crocodiles, they weren't actually crocodiles. The strange evolutionary relationship can be best seen in Rudiodon of the eastern United States, a genus of phytosaur that could grow between 3 and 8 meters in length. With a long flat snout and a tapering paddle-like tail, this animal was a perfectly adapted ambush predator. Living its life in the rivers and marshlands of the region, this animal would have laid in wait for large prey to come to the riverbank to drink. Like a modern crocodile, it would have lunged out of the water, ensnaring its catch within its powerful maw. The strangest of the North American phytosaurs was Nicrosaurus, a creature which again resembled a crocodile, but with slightly longer legs, indicating that this creature spent more time out of the water than its contemporaries. Remains of the well-known prosauropod dinosaur, Plateosaurus, have been discovered in riverbed sandstones that are likely to have become trapped in quicksand and quickly dismembered by creatures like Nicrosaurus. What makes the animal strange is the presence of a head crest in the top of the skull, something that we don't typically associate with other phytosaurs. It is likely that the crest was colorful, used to communicate, signal, or display to members of the same species, making for a very odd sight indeed. The most awesome of the phytosaurs is, without a doubt, Smilosukis. Estimates vary of just how big this ambush predator would have been, ranging from guesses of 7 meters right through to 12. If the upper estimates are accurate, it is possible that this creature could have matched the size of some of the biggest crocodilians in prehistory, such as the mighty Purosaurus or Deinosuchus. The animal was extremely heavy built, with 1.5 meters long skull. It is, if the upper estimates are to be relied upon, the largest land animal of the Triassic, and would have been more than capable of bringing down the region's largest herbivores. Traveling southward to the vast and mysterious continent of South America, we are met with a whole host of new archosaurs. Typically, the non-dinosaur archosaurs we have discovered from South America have been far more diverse and unconventional than their cousins in the north. But some groups of animal are still very much recognizable. Staganolepus was present here as one of the largest archosaurian herbivores, and it too is an atasaur, the group which included the aforementioned large herbivores, such as Desmatosuchus and Longosuchus. As another bulky, slow-moving browser, Staganolepus would have been as heavily armored as its cousins. It was toothless, sporting a strange upturned beak for digging up vegetation like a pig, a 3-meter-long one at that. Its forelimbs were thick and robust, and would have aided the animal in kicking up the soil before it began to dig for food. Many of the non-dinosaur archosaurs we know of from South America are much more slight of stature than their North American cousins. It is here that we will first encounter creatures such as Pizanosaurus, dinosauriform archosaurs that are so similar to dinosaurs that have been the subject of much debate in the past as to whether or not they are actually dinosaurs. Pisanosaurus was small, only about a meter in length, and resembled a slender quadrupedal hadrosaur superficially. Its legs were long, and the animal was likely fast, congregating in groups or herds for safety on the Triassic floodplains of northwest Argentina 228 million years ago. Argentina, at the time, was a humid, warm volcanic site, with marshes and floodplains stretching out across the ground. Little Pisanosaurus would have been a connoisseur of the horsetails and ferns that would have grown along the riverbanks and marsh edges. It shared the area with some of the most famous early dinosaurs. Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor both lived alongside it, and may likely have represented substantial threat to the little herbivore. These dinosaurs would have been tame in comparison to a much more deadly non-dinosaur threat, however, from the Archosaur, Saurosuchus. Living alongside and likely actively hunting Pisanosaurus, this 5.5 to 7 meter long carnivore was another animal that resembled a modern crocodile, only with a head that more closely resembled that of Tyrannosaurus rex. Walking on 4 thick, sturdy, pillar-like limbs, this creature was identifiable by its bulky, almost hippo-like skull. Such a massive skull would have harbored powerful jaws and long, shear-like teeth, which would have been used to snap and slash at the bodies of local herbivores. Saurosuchus was the top predator of its time, the largest member of a group known as the Rauisuchians, another offshoot of the Archosaur family tree. The teeth within the Archosaur's skull were long and knife-like, and would have become worn out and replaced easily. It is theorized that eventually, when the creature approached old age, the teeth would have stopped growing, and unable to successfully hunt or eat, starvation would have quickly taken these individuals. Triassic South America also holds ownership of some of the smallest non-dinosaur archosaurs of the time. Very much a far cry from some of the giants we've covered so far were creatures like Marsuchus, an animal that looked almost exactly like an early theropod dinosaur. Only 40 centimeters in length from nose to tail, this little reptile was an archosaur that was on its way to evolving into the founders of the dinosaur dynasty. Creatures like Marsuchus, with their slender bodies and long legs, tiny little carnivores the size of a human shoe, all appear on the extended family tree of the giants such as Tyrannosaurus and Spinosaurus. As our evolutionary story as hominids began in Africa's Rift Valley towards the end of the Cenozoic, the dinosaurs can trace their lineage to the misty floodplains of the Triassic. Other examples of tiny South American archosaurs included Gracillosuchus, a bipedal crocodile-like animal only 60 centimeters in length, and Luisuchus, which was about a meter long, more closely related to dinosauriform archosaurs such as Pisanosaurus. The wildlife of Africa was drastically different across the Triassic period. Similar to elsewhere in the world, it saw the evolution of the first dinosaurs, as well as some of the most famous non-dinosaurian archosaurs discovered to date. You might recognize the name Euparkeria from books or television shows on Mesozoic life, for example. This swift little creature, crocodilian in appearance, with long stilt-like legs and a tapering tail, was about half a meter long and inhabited the forests of the Middle Triassic of South Africa. Euparkeria's hind limbs were longer than its forelimbs, one of the first creatures in the fossil record to exhibit this. This has led scientists to believe that the little Archosaur was able to rear up on its hind legs for extended periods of time, to walk or even run, after the little insects and reptiles it would have hunted. From studies on Euparkeria's sclerotic rings, a type of bone located around the eyes, paleontologists have determined that the animal was probably nocturnal, or, due to South Africa's southerly geographical position at the time, evolved to cope with long conditions of low light over the winter months. Euparkeria has historically been believed to be a very close relative, or even a direct ancestor, of the first dinosaurs, creatures such as the aforementioned Eoraptor. Earlier on in South Africa, the region was home to a much larger, predatory Archosauriform, however. Living a lifestyle very similar to a modern-day crocodile was Proterosuchus, a 3.5-meter-long semi-aquatic ambush predator that likely fed on the abundant herbivore Lystrosaurus as it traversed the waterways of the land. Proterosuchus's powerful tail allowed it to force itself through the water, lunging at its next meal with extreme force. Strangely, the creature also possessed a peculiar hook snout that, contrary to popular belief, was not used to help Proterosuchus grip prey. Scientists don't exactly know what it was used for, in fact, but the most widely accepted running theory is that the odd feature was used in a form of display to signal to potential mates. Further north, in Tanzania, lived another top predator, potentially one of the largest of the Middle Triassic. Mwambukarele was a large, bulky Archosauriform with large blade-like teeth. It would have hunted in the marshlands and early forests of the lands of its time, perhaps living a more terrestrial lifestyle than Proterosuchus. Perhaps the strangest little Archosaur of the Triassic was a little creature called Congonaphan. Standing no taller than 10 centimeters, this tiny, slender biped resembled a baby theropod dinosaur in form, but was in fact more closely related to the pterosaurs. It is a part of the family of creatures known as ladrupedids, insectivorous creatures that may even be direct descendants of the pterosaurs. With a tail the same length as its body and long, slender hind limbs for jumping across branches, this little creature was in the process of laying the evolutionary foundations for one of the most iconic groups of creatures the world has ever seen. The bustling cities and rolling countryside of Europe we know from the present day was also covered in the hot wetlands and forests seen in other parts of the world around 200 million years ago in the Triassic period. While tiny early theropod dinosaurs such as Pendrag were beginning to evolve, other Archosaurs were still the lords of the land. The top terrestrial predator of Europe throughout the Middle Triassic would have been a creature known as Tachinosuchus, a 3-meter-long Rauisuchian Archosaur, native to what would one day become Switzerland and Italy. This creature was more lightly built than its closest Rauisuchian relatives, such as the aforementioned Arizonosaurus and Saurosuchus, and would have made a living for itself, stalking both terrestrial and aquatic prey on its long, powerful legs. Built almost like a reptilian lion, this swift hunter would have been capable of impressive speeds as it bounded after its prospective victims. As the Triassic progressed, the stage was set for more and more impressive creatures to evolve, and as Tachinosuchus went extinct, more and more predators were evolving to take its place. One such creature was Mistriosuchus, a creature very similar to modern-day gharials, a species of crocodilian with a long, slender snout, used for snapping and sweeping at fish. Although this creature was likely an aquatic predator, capable of effectively propelling itself through the rivers and lakes of the late Triassic with its fluke-like tail, it needed to be wary. Its slender jaws were incredibly fragile, so it would have likely only have been able to hunt small species of fish, as opposed to larger aquatic creatures or terrestrial reptiles. If at any point a Mistriosuchus bit off more than it could chew, it risked damaging its fragile jaws, rendering it unable to feed itself. Mistriosuchus was not a Rauisuchian, but rather a phytosaur, similar to Proterosuchus of Africa. As such, it was much more traditionally crocodile-like in shape, and was a much more familiar creature to the human eye. Creatures of this nature were few and far between in the otherwise wild evolutionary experiments of the Triassic. Much like a crocodile, Mistriosuchus would have spent a large portion of its time sunning itself on the banks of the rivers that flowed through Triassic Europe, entering the water when it needed to catch a meal or when it got too warm. Although its primary habitat was river systems, it has been proposed that this creature may have also inhabited estuaries and coastlines, much like a modern saltwater crocodile. For the Triassic Archosaurs, Europe, very much like South America, was something of a pinnacle of diversity when it came to evolution and speciation. The non-dinosaurian Archosaurs of the continent were not all gigantic predators, and many small, slender animals were present here too. Take Coelophysis, for example, a relative of South America's Pisanosaurus that was slightly larger and slightly more robust. It was another dinosaur form reptile, very closely related to the dinosaurs of the Triassic, but placed in a separate family. It was just over 2 meters long from nose to tail, and about half the height of a modern human. With long, stilt-like legs, this creature was quadrupedal and extremely common, potentially living in large herds or groups to provide safety in numbers. It was likely a browser, feeding on low-growing vegetation, and would have needed to be wary of the Rauisuchians and theropod dinosaurs that stalked the land in the early days of the Mesozoic. Think of it almost like the reptile's answer to a gazelle or antelope. Coelophysis was a Polish native, found in the Drano Beds formation of the Middle Triassic. Elsewhere in Europe, Scotland precisely, at the same time, another little dinosaur form Archosaur was making waves. At a meter in length, Saltopus almost exactly resembled a theropod dinosaur. In fact, one of the only things that separates it from actually being a dinosaur is the number of vertebrae bones in its hip. Saltopus has 2 of these bones, whereas early theropod dinosaurs had 3, leading scientists to believe that this little Archosaur was well on its way to giving rise to the dinosaurs, as it just had a little bit longer to go. Finally, we arrive at the shores of Asia, the world's largest continent. This too is a land populated by non-dinosaurian Archosaurs, some of which were the strangest of the strange. One such oddity is Lotosaurus, a 2.5 meter long poposaur, which has been discovered in China's Hunan province. Often depicted as a bulky herbivorous animal, there has been some speculation among scientists that Lotosaurus was actually a durophagous animal, one that ate shellfish or crustaceans. As such, it would likely have occupied coastlines or riverbanks, snapping up the tiny, hard-shelled animals with tough jaws and teeth. What makes Lotosaurus so strange is the presence of a sail running down the length of its back. Scientists are unsure of the purpose of the sail at this time, but a running theory would explain both its lifestyle and sail's function. If Lotosaurus was a shellfish eater, it would make sense for it to spend a fair amount of time underwater, or at least wading in it, in order to find food. With its body submerged, it could have kept the short sail raised above the waterline, allowing for the sail's possible thermoregulatory functions to keep the Archosaur at a comfortable temperature. On the other side of the Archosaurian spectrum was the equally weird Archosaurus, a native of what is now modern-day India. It inhabited the Middle Triassic and was a short, sinuous quadrupedal animal, about 2.5 meters in length. The legs were short and stout, and both the neck and tail were long and winding, giving the creature a superficially similar appearance to the Triassic reptile Nothosaurus, a marine creature unrelated to Archosaurs. It is likely that Archosaurus was an inhabitant of the Triassic Indian wetlands and marshes, where it likely fed on fish, which it was highly adapted to eating, with its tapering snake-like neck. Even prior to the evolution of the dinosaurs, it is staggering to witness the sheer diversification of life in just one group of animals. Some of these creatures are so far removed in form from each other, but were all descendants from the same basic stock. By the end of the Triassic, the group that gave rise to the dinosaurs was potentially even more diverse than the dinosaurs themselves. But the icons of the Mesozoic were taking over, spreading out into all new shapes and forms. The theropods and prosauropods were well established, and it was the dinosaurs that would inherit this planet. The non-dinosaur archosaurs needn't worry, however. Throughout prehistory, there would be species from their ranks that would rise up to the dominant life forms in their areas. It was the non-dinosaur archosaurs of the Triassic that would eventually give way to several iconic creatures: Sarcosuchus and Dinosuchus, the gigantic dinosaur-hunting crocodilians of the Mesozoic; Purosaurus, Stomatosuchus, and Quincana, the weird and wonderful archosaurs that would terrorize the waterways of the Cenozoic. Even today, archosaurs are some of the most feared predators alive. The saltwater crocodile, Nile crocodile, gharial, and American alligator are among the largest and most powerful creatures native to our modern waters. Prehistory is known for its dinosaurs, but their lesser-known cousins should be acknowledged just as much.